Welcome to Putback here on SNY.TV. I'm Ian Begley, SNY NBA Insider, and we've got a special edition this afternoon talking about the Julius Randle news, season-ending surgery for Julius Randle on that dislocated shoulder. I'm joined by two great guests, Steve Popper, longtime Knicks beat writer from Newsday, and Jonathan Macri, the dean of Knicks Film School. Fellas, let's get right into it here. The decision, I'm told that Julius really wanted to come back, and he's devastated by how this had played out. And some of it was about stability with his shoulder. They just couldn't get the stability where they needed it in order for him to come back. Some of it was the possibility of re-injury, dislocation, or even doing further permanent damage to that shoulder. Those are a couple factors that played into it. We all know he wanted to come back, but one factor here that I think particularly made Randle upset was the idea that they played so well in January with OG Anunoby. He saw this team as having a real chance to compete, and so he was trying to make it back. Obviously couldn't happen, and now the Knicks move forward. And Steve, I want to start with you. The idea that, we were all kind of waiting on pins and needles for him to get cleared for contact. Were you surprised that we're here today, and how do you think they move forward?
I am surprised only because, look, we've all seen him on the court, soaked in sweat, working, and this is a guy who just does not miss games. He had played every game until he flipped over Jaime Jaquez here this season. Worked so hard to get back, and I think, as you said, he saw what the potential was for this team, and I think the potential was great. I think this is a team that at full strength could have competed with anybody in the NBA this year. So I think we're all surprised, but I think he also laid out this possibility. When we talked to him in February, he did not rule it out and said, it was, sort of a wait and see, and didn't rule out that he was going to, that he had considered surgery at the time and that he was going to possibly need surgery when the season was over. But I think, what we've seen from the reporting today, having to the risk of it possibly being a permanent injury that could end a career or disrupt his career, I think the decision was go ahead, do it now and be ready for next year.
John, your reaction, and what do you think is the best case scenario for the Knicks here without Randle?
I mean, my reaction just to what Steve said, I think Steve nailed something here, which is that, we always knew this was a possibility. And I think all of you guys who are with the team every day and report on them have kind of reported different versions of the fact that, he has been going through some incredibly grueling rehab that is hard and painful and has been going on for a while. And I have to think that there's a lot of other players out there who, when this injury came down and they got the initial diagnosis and surgery was offered as an option, they just would have taken the surgery and not even tried to make it back. So I think it speaks so much and so highly of Julius Randle that he at least tried to give it a go, and it seems like he pushed it to the point where couldn't push it anymore, and this was very obviously the correct decision. In terms of the second part of the question, Ian, long-term impact, long-term ramifications, I have to hope that, and this is famous last words, to trust a team that has not proven it should be trusted in terms of their reporting on this stuff. But they told us reevaluation in 5 months. All right, well, that puts us at the beginning of September. So maybe doing this now gets him back for the start of next season, which would obviously be a best case scenario. And if he can make it back, I see no reason why they cannot, to some extent, pick up where they left off in January and be the team that was, if not running roughshod over the league, be a team that is a true blue, top 5, top 6 team, a contending team.
Now, the decision, I was told it wasn't something that they were kind of stringing along the fan base. I think Julius was making an earnest effort to come back, and this ultimate decision, I think, came down this week at some point. And so, I don't think, I've heard some people say, why are they kind of stringing us along in terms of what the Knicks were doing? And I don't think that they were just they were not saying things that were untrue. I should say that they definitely could have been clear on timetables. They could have given the fans more information and left less to be guessed at. But as far as the timeline on the decision, I think it happened very recently. And so he did give an earnest effort to really get out there, give it a go. I think he's going to become extension eligible at some point. So I don't know how much that factored in, but I have to think it factored in to a degree to this decision if you're going to be risking, permanent damage on your shoulder. I mean, anybody who was dealing with that would certainly think of that. And as they're making this decision, one thing I wanted to ask you guys and Steve first, what does this mean now for the rest of the season with this group team that's healthy? OG Anunoby may be coming back. What do you see from here?
Well, again, it's covered in ifs because we got to see if OG comes back. I think we've seen with this team that we don't always get the full injury report, and we don't know, was there tears in there for Julius that weren't disclosed? I think, and any doctor we talk to about these things for opinions, they always tell us we're not in the room with the client and the patient, and we don't know for sure. We're guessing. So I think we're guessing a little bit. But I will say this, under the assumption that OG comes back and is something close to what he was before the injury by the time the playoffs start, in my head, I say you're trading Quentin Grimes and Julius Randle for OG Anunoby and Dante DiVincenzo. And look at what they were last year. So I say if OG's healthy and everyone's healthy, I do think that they're still a handful for a team. I don't think they're what we thought they were going to be, where they could threaten any team in the East, maybe any team in the NBA. With their depth, I think the loss of Julius offensively is a killer. But I think defensively, I think they're a very good team. I think the offense with Dante is better than Quentin. So to me, I don't think this is a lost season right now. I still think they're going to be a threat in the postseason, just not to the level that I think we're anticipating and Knicks fans were hoping and dreaming of.
John, I want your thoughts on that. I'll just interject quickly on OG. Just that I was told that, the medical side of this, they're being very conservative with their approach on Anunoby. And I think, I don't know exactly if or when he will be back, but I think once he gets on the court, if he's not there already, he still will have some things to clear in terms of how the medical team is looking at it. They're being very conservative. So we'll see where it goes. But, John, your thoughts on the rest of the way here without Julius Randle?
I completely agree with Steve. I think their ceiling lowers without Julius, right? And that's, I don't think anyone would argue with that. But they could still, I would say, beat, again, if you get some version of OG that is close to the one that we saw before the injury, I think they could beat just about any other team in the East besides Boston. And if you look at last year's Miami Heat as a model, they lost Tyler Hero and Julius Randle, two very different sorts of players. But Tyler Hero was a guy for that Heat team who sopped up a massive amount of usage, 25 plus usage rate, and was completely lost. But in losing him, they were able to focus more on defense, and Jimmy Butler basically just took on the lion's share of the usage. Now, Jalen Brunson has led the league in usage since OG Anunoby and Julius Randle went down. Can he keep that up for an extended playoff run? That's a lot to ask. But if he can, and you bring OG back and you give them that extra 35-minute-a-night piece, again, if I was another team in the East, like Steve said, I would not be looking forward to facing this team.
Yeah, and I think to a degree, maybe there's the clarity there in the locker room on Randle is a good thing. Josh Hart said the other day, we're just approaching things now that this is the team that we have, meaning without Julius Randle, without OG Anunoby. And if they come back, we'll be pleasantly surprised. I think that uncertainty, I'm not saying that, guys are upset about it, but it creates the idea that, hey, maybe he's coming back. Maybe we have to plan for it now that they know Julius Randle isn't back. It gives them a little clarity on how to plan moving forward. Steve, looking beyond this season with Julius Randle, obviously he's under contract. We all talk about the Knicks potentially making a big move at some point, maybe this summer. Does this mean anything for the big picture with the Knicks and Julius Randle?
Well, I know you mentioned before the possibility of extension, and both he and Brunson, I think, are eligible this summer for an extension. I've heard whispers that Brunson would be open to discussions to do it this summer. And I don't know, Julius's case may be coming off of this. It's not a wise decision, or maybe it is because, we've seen what can happen. To me, I think that maybe this accentuates the need to go ahead and make one of those all-in moves that they've been talking about for a while, because you see how fragile this is. They had put together a team that I think people were looking at as a championship contender this year. And you can say, it is next year. But I think there's a lot of uncertainty. You've still got to sign OG Anunoby. You've still got to figure out a way to sign and keep Isaiah Hartenstein. Precious Achiuwa is a restricted free agent. I think they've done an interesting job here building, but they've got a lot of young or a lot of draft picks here that are still just kind of sitting in there waiting for a target. I think that the Bogdanovich contract and that are things that will be dangled out there this summer. And, is it the time that maybe we see that Donovan Mitchell would work here, because we've seen Jalen play with smaller guards and it works. I just think when you see how this came apart here, getting all the talent and stars you can is an important thing. You can do it, and this is the time when they have the cap, the ability around the cap to work it.
I'll just pick up and before I talk about the next season and beyond, Steve, whispers about Jalen Brunson being open to a contract extension. That's the best news I've heard today, albeit it's a low bar to raise over that. As far as this summer goes, I think, unquestionably this injury complicates things, because from my vantage point, at least, and maybe this is incorrect, I look at how well Dante DiVincenzo has fit in the starting lineup. And I'm not saying he's Donovan Mitchell. Donovan Mitchell's an all-NBA caliber player. But he's third in the league in threes. He defends. Obviously, there's chemistry with Brunson and with the rest of the starting five. So, is that a spot that you're going to swap out for a star player? I don't know. OG, obviously, they're going to hope to resign him. He's a lock for part of their core. And then if you don't have, one of these big centers that becomes available to take, their place in the starting five, which again, we all know who those guys are. One in Philly, everybody's had their eye on for years, but who knows if that comes to fruition. So all of a sudden you're looking at, all right, well, where is there going to be the upgrade? What spot is left to upgrade? And if you land on the position of like, all right, your co-star next to Brunson, well, I don't know how tradable now Julius Randle is this summer, because he's going to be in the middle of rehabbing from this injury. It feels like wrong to even bring that up on the day this news is announced. But if we are looking ahead for moves this team could potentially make, I think it would be irresponsible not to at least, call that into question. What does that look like? What would those negotiations even sound like between them and another team if Randle's name comes up, to the extent that it would come up?
I would add too that when you talk about next year, I just don't think this year is a give up right now. If OG is okay, because I think one of the advantages they've had, as hard as it's been and the load that's been on some of these guys, is that we've allowed Dante to become what he is. I think the best season of his career by far. Deuce McBride has come up and just become a real important two-way player. I just think there are pieces here that have had, because they've had so much time without these guys, that if you look at it, there are pieces here who have developed and become an important part of this team. And I think when you fit in an OG, it maybe fits a little better than it did when he went out.
The interesting thing here is who steps up now with Julius out. Regardless of what happens with OG, Steve, you just said it, guys have stepped up. Miles McBride certainly is one of those guys playing incredibly well right now. One thing that I wonder, now that we know Julius isn't coming back, we're still not sure about OG. Can these guys who are playing 40-plus minutes a night, can they make it to the finish line here, and how do they look going into the postseason? The Knicks, obviously, if they finish top 6, they'll have about a week off during that play-in tournament, so they should get some rest then. But to me, that's an issue, the elevated minutes that guys are playing now because the team is shorthanded. But specifically now with Randle out, I think we're obviously seeing Josh Hart triple doubles very regularly now, and obviously the offense, sometimes it's there, sometimes it isn't. I think Precious Achiuwa at the 4 as a backup, and he was even starting there for a little bit. I think the Knicks had liked him in that spot in particular, so maybe that's something you see. But Steve, who do you see replacing Randle right now, even with no OG on the court yet?
You're just a different team. I mean, look, you play with what you have, and they're a smaller team. They play small. I do think, and I've said to people that I think Bogdanovich, as much as he's struggled at times this season since coming over, I just have a feeling that he's a guy who in a playoff game, off the bench, you're going to need 10 minutes without Brunson. He's a guy who can put up, 15 points in 15 minutes. I just kind of I've always felt like he's a guy who we're not going to scratch out of the rotation in the playoffs completely. He's just a veteran who's a scorer, can create his own shot, can score at 3 different levels. Defense, maybe not so much, but like I said, I just think they become a different team. I think Jonathan mentioned earlier about the Miami with Tyler Hero last year. I think when you look at they were playing hard and playing McBride in that lineup, they're pests. They're just annoyances to teams, and they play you a different way. Having Hartenstein and hopefully a healthy Mitchell Robinson back there, that gives you sort of an anchor in the back. But I think that they're just an aggressive 94-foot team that's gonna cause problems for somebody. And how they fill it in, whether it's Precious, who's come up at times, Bogey, I just think they have enough options here to make up for it, and they've had plenty of time to get used to it.
Completely agree with Steve again. Steve's taking all my answers. I don't think it's reasonable to look at all the guys we've mentioned, Deuce, Dante, Josh Hart. I know his shot comes and goes, Hartenstein. I don't think it's reasonable to look at any of these guys and expect them to do more than they've already been doing. And if you want to throw in OG in there as well for the moments that he's been healthy, I think he's certainly lived up to expectations. Bogdanovich is the guy that they got him to be more or less what he's been throughout his entire career. Now, maybe not in as many minutes. He's been a guy that's averaged 30 minutes a game, and he hasn't done that here. But he's been a reliable, efficient scorer that his offense has been good enough to justify what is, let's say questionable defense. It's probably been a little bit worse than questionable here. But I just think he's a guy, that's why I think what Steve said was so prescient. We know he can do it in the playoffs because he's done it before. We've seen him do it in playoff series. I think he's a big game player. I think they're going to need him. And I almost wonder if they shouldn't spend the next 7 games. It's going to sound weird because he hasn't been hurt, but like ramping him up, putting him in maybe for a few extra minutes and really kind of giving yourself over to like, okay, what does it look like if this guy takes a dozen shots a night or maybe even more? And can we, and again, this is where OG comes into play because he's the skeleton key that unlocks so much with his two-way play. What are the lineups we can put around Bogdanovich where his defense is not hurting you too much, but you could also really spotlight what he's able to do on the offensive end? And that's going to be a tough job for Tibbs.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, Jonathan. I think with Bogdanovich, and probably to a degree Alec Burks too, but Bogdanovich, sure. I think he was used to getting a certain amount of minutes, a certain amount of shots, night in and night out. He could kind of count on that. And as an offensive player, that's kind of where you get your rhythm. And maybe with him being yanked after missing a couple of shots in a few of these games after being traded to New York, he doesn't have that rhythm. So, yeah, maybe you do spend some time here giving him a couple more minutes, give him a couple more shots to get in rhythm. The question that I think I have and other teams have is defensively, is Tom Thibodeau going to be able to have him on the floor and get what he wants out of a team defense and in a playoff situation? I think that's a fair question to ask when you talk about Bogdanovich moving forward, but that's something that he'll have a chance to prove over these last few games, which, as we know, the Knicks could really use some wins here to get them into a spot where they have home court advantage and certainly avoid that play-in tournament. Steve, Sacramento tonight, and the schedule moving forward. It's there's not a lot of gimmies outside of Brooklyn, and who knows what Boston is going to be doing at that point in the season. But it's tough sledding from here on out. And as you look at that bench, haven't got a lot from the bench. What do you see as the big issue there, and can it be fixed as they wait for Anunoby, or at this point is it what it is and they just have to move forward with it?
We might have to expect Thibodeau to play guys a lot of minutes. That's something I don't know if we've ever seen that before. Look, as you just mentioned about the Bogdanovich thing, I think there are ways they can work this, because I think where he really becomes valuable is in those no Brunson minutes. And if you can pair him with, McBride, Robinson, if OG can be on the floor with him, Hart, I think if you can hide him enough defensively, just like they do. They hide Jalen at times. There's guys on the team that's not their forte. But to your point on here, I think looking at the schedule, I don't think any of us would have guessed a couple months ago that these Bulls games coming late in the season would mean anything. And now it's the Bulls are jockeying for position like everybody else. So I think this becomes a tough trip. We've got Chicago. We go to Milwaukee, and it's, they're trying to get their stuff together, and they're a mess right now. Chicago again, Boston. It's, this is not an easy way to go on the finish line. And I think there was a point here where it looked like they could kind of coast to, whatever it was going to be, 3-4, 2-3-4. I don't think that's the case anymore. And I think, you're in danger of losing home court. The way Orlando has played them this year, even though Orlando is often a home court down there for the Knicks, I don't think you want to give that up and face a team like that. And by the way, with Orlando, if they do have to face them, they better hope OG's healthy, because Banchero is a handful for anybody. I just think this is a tough path, but I think one that they're sort of made for and ready for. I think everything is contingent on, April 20th if OG's ready to go.
It's going to be interesting to me, too. Does Jalen Brunson get officiated any differently after Tom Thibodeau came out and said what he said after the Miami game? And, it's led to a little bit of a narrative. We talked to Brian Windhorst about it a couple of days ago about Jalen maybe hunting free throws. And I talked to a couple of people, and they disagree with that pretty vehemently. What's happening, they say, is he's playing the game the right way. Any contact there is him trying to create some space to get a shot off. He's not trying to trick anyone or fool anyone. And also, Steve, we've talked to him a lot. He's not complaining about the refs publicly to us. He talks to them on the floor, claps his hands in the air every once in a while after a call. But we have not heard from Jalen Brunson any complaints about the officiating. So, the idea that he's complaining is not true. And I think the idea that he's hunting out fouls and trying to get to the line, at least, based on the conversations you have, that's not true either. The numbers seem to back it up a little bit too. A couple of fans pointed out that he's not top 10 in free throw attempts, despite being top 3 in drives per game. And according to my guy, Charlie Hustle, 18% of Jalen's points are off of free throws. And that's 126th in the league. So the numbers don't really align there on the free throw discrepancy. But let's get back to Julius before we wrap things up, guys. Do you think that once he's back 5 months, 6 months, whatever it is, will you look back at this decision and say, hey, this was the right decision. It was fine for him to push it to where he did, and now he's back and he's healthy and everybody's happy? Or do you think they made the wrong decision here? Should they have done surgery initially and tried to play this differently? Steve, what do you think?
I don't think we can look in the rearview mirror here. I think, as we said in the beginning, what Julius is, the kind of guy he is, we all knew if he could do it, he was going to try and come back. If someone told him there's no way that day, then I think he would have gone and had the surgery. But he put off ankle surgery through the playoffs last year. He's going to do whatever he can to get on the court, and I think we should commend him for that. And I would add, I had mentioned this to Jalen Brunson the other day. Julius, seeing the work that he puts in, the kind of attitude he's had here, and seeing him on Jalen's podcast, Jalen and Josh's podcast, I think maybe have opened some eyes in New York to what we know in the locker room, what Julius is, what kind of guy he is, what kind of guy he is to this team. Probably has helped his reputation a little bit this last couple of months. But I think he, you can't look back and say this is a wrong decision. You can do it and say, whatever that, we should have done it. But I just don't think that's the way to do it. I think if he could play, he was going to do it all along, and you admire him for that.
I think
what are your thoughts there, John?
Yeah, I think the wrong decision would have been ignoring what, again, the most updated reports are that the doctors told him that if he came back, there would be a significant risk of re-injury and making the problem worse, which if you just look at the timeline that exists already, well, now you're not only talking about losing this year, but you're talking about losing a significant chunk of next year as well. In terms of putting off the surgery, how rare is it in the NBA when you have a basketball team that is capable of winning, maybe not even winning a championship, making a finals, and what that means to players, what it means to an organization. This team, I don't know if after, as a fully healthy version of them, did they have, 5% finals equity, 10% finals equity, something probably in that range, but it was more than zero. And I think if that number is higher than zero, you owe it to yourself to see if you can give it a real run. And that's why I think when you look at the risk versus the reward, if that was the upside, and the downside is, all right, you put it off for 2 months, but reevaluate it in the beginning of September. I don't. Maybe something will happen. Maybe something else will emerge where I'm going to be made to look like a fool for saying this, but that doesn't sound like the worst downside to me. If reevaluation a full month before training camp is slated to open, so I see it as having been the correct decision. But what do I know?
Yeah, we know Julius wanted to play, and I agree with Steve. I think you commend him for that, and whatever you make of his Knick legacy, whether you're talking about it today or you're talking about it after he comes back, we'll see what happens there. That's got to be a big part of what you talk about when you talk about Julius Randle in New York, trying to play, wanting to get out there, wanting to give it all he had. And, you commend that, and we'll see where the Knicks go from here. But that'll do it for us on the Putback, this special edition, Julius Randle, shoulder surgery. Thank you to Steve Popper, Newsday, beat writer with the Knicks. Thank you to Jonathan Macri, Dean of Knicks Film School. We will be back on Wednesday here at the Putback. We're going to have a couple of guests breaking things down, and also keep an eye on Honda Sports Night every night for your nightly Knicks coverage.